I'm a bad person. Over the last weeks and months, I have been honing and tweaking a deck in potentially the most maligned archetype in Commander, Stax. The word itself carries a massive emotional weighting, and when I say I have a Stax deck, I'm met with a range of responses, running the gamut from, oh god no, and why, to, I don't know what that means. Well, today, we're going to delve into the archetype, the key pieces, and just what makes it so awful. Or not? So what is Stax? A catch-all term referring to a number of deck archetypes in Vintage. Shared factors include a heavy focus on permanent spells, primarily artifacts, and prison or taxing effects that slow down opponents' abilities to play their own spells, benefit from abilities, or amass a board state. The archetype appears to draw its name from two sources. One, the original deck name, $T4KS, an acronym for the $4,000 solution, referring to the deck's cost, and two, a key card in the deck, Smokestack, an artifact for 4 generic mana that reads, at the beginning of your upkeep, you may put a soot counter on Smokestack. At the beginning of each player's upkeep, that player sacrifices a permanent for each soot counter on Smokestack. Lovely. This highlights one of the key themes in Stax decks. While a great number of the effects in these decks are symmetrical, in that they apply to the controller as well as other players, the decks are built to withstand, play around, or even benefit from these effects. The combination of lands that produce more than one mana, like Ancient Tomb, Mishra's Workshop, and Tolarian Academy, with Crucible of Worlds, which allows you to play lands from your graveyard, makes it so that sacrificing lands to Smokestack is a viable option for the Stax player, while opponents' decks will struggle to maintain a board state as you keep piling on the counters. Crucible of Worlds also enables the continued use of the land destruction effects present on Wasteland and Strip Mine, which in a 60-card 1v1 environment can essentially allow the Stax player to lock their opponent out completely by repeatedly destroying their lands. Fun, right? Another staple of Stax comes in the form of sphere effects, drawing their name from Sphere of Resistance, an artifact for 2 generic that makes all spells cost 1 more to cast. Alongside this, we have Thorn of Amethyst, which specifically affects non-creature spells for 2, Lodestone Golem, a 5/3 artifact creature for 4, which affects non-artifact spells, and Trinisphere, a 3-cost artifact that reads, as long as Trinisphere is untapped, each spell that would cost less than 3 mana to cast costs 3 mana to cast. That first line of text is particularly interesting, as unlike the other effects in this category, it allows players to break parity by tapping it. It's worth mentioning that cost increases like Sphere or Thorn are applied before cost reductions, like Foundry Inspector, but also abilities like Cascade. Trinisphere, however, always applies after all other modifications, and increases the cost of any spell for less than 3 mana to 3 mana, making it great against the aforementioned Cascade and other free spells like Force of Will or Deflecting Swat, as well as an incredible pain in the ass. So we've covered a lot of the key pieces from the origins of the archetype, but Magic has evolved a lot over time, and you are not quite as likely to see a lot of these cards crop up at your LGS's Commander Night, particularly given a copy of Mishra's Workshop will set you back something in the region of $3,000. Now, while all of these pieces synergize to form the combined strategy of Stax, they are not inherently Stax pieces in isolation. While different players' definitions of what make a Stax piece differ, I'm going to utilize the definition established by Kristen Gregory in her article for Card Kingdom titled Not Everything That Slows You Down is Stax, which I will link below. A Stax piece is a card that actively prevents you from playing the game in some way. Smokestack is a Stax piece because it prevents you from establishing a board state. Winter Orb is a Stax piece because it prevents you from untapping your lands. Blind Obedience, while likely to appear in many a Stax deck, is not a Stax piece in isolation because it just slows down the ability of creatures to attack, block, or activate tap abilities, rather than preventing them altogether. The same is true for sphere effects. In isolation, they simply slow down your ability to play spells. When combined with other effects, they can actively prevent you from taking game actions, but alone, less so. Hate bears, i.e. creatures that counter or prevent effects like Collector Oof or Elishnorn Mother of Machines, also sit in this adjacent to Stax or Stax-light territory. While they may feel like they prevent you from playing the game, particularly if your deck relies on the effects that they stop, they are not Stax pieces under this definition, as they don't prevent you from taking the actions that are hardwired into the game. So let's dive into my brand of Stax deck. Fronted by Marneus Calgar from the Warhammer 40k Forces of the Imperium Precon, it felt deeply thematic to meld the grimdark vision of the 41st millennium with some of the most miserable mechanics ever conceived. Marneus is a 3/5 Astartes warrior with double strike, 4 Esper and 2 generic. He also has the ability Master Tactician, which draws you a card whenever 1 or more tokens enter the battlefield under your control, and Chapter Master, which creates 2/2/2 white Astartes warrior creature tokens with vigilance for 6 generic mana. The overall goal of the deck is to bog down opponents' game plans with Stax pieces, tax effects, hate bears, and a great degree of control magic, while creating tokens to leverage Calgar's draw ability, and ultimately find the pieces to draw the entirety of my library and win with Laboratory Maniac. The pieces in question are Ashnod's Altar, of course, and either Training Grounds, which reduces the cost of Calgar's ability by 2, and allows you to infinitely draw by sacrificing both of the tokens created to alter and activate Chapter Master repeatedly, or Nadir Kraken, with which you can pick up your library by drawing, paying 1 generic to create a tentacle token, triggering Master Tactician to draw again, then sacrificing the tentacle to Ashnod's to pay the cost to create another tentacle, and so on. This also nets you near infinite generic mana with which to play the pieces required to get Labman on board and close out the game. This deck can also win through combat by creating a huge number of constructs using Simulacrum Synthesizer, a great way to trigger Calgar, which can be accelerated using Elishnorn Mother of Machines' ability to double the trigger. It helps that Synthesizer triggers off of a lot of our key pieces like Altar, Trinisphere, and Smokestack, and failing that, we can drain the table with Psychosis Crawler and our massive amount of draw triggers. And what's more 40k than this weird-ass crab robot? To keep Master Tactician triggering throughout the game and maintain a healthy source of card draw, I rely on a number of creatures. Prince Imrahil the Fair and Emrakul's Messenger both trigger off of our second draw each turn and create a 1/1 human soldier, perfect for sacrificing to Altar, Phyrexian Tower, Skullclamp, or Beseech the Mirror, and a 0/1 Eldrazi Spawn, which can be sacrificed for generic mana, respectively. Lothar Corrupt Sheriff creates a treasure and loses us a life every time a player casts their second spell each turn, and Fairy Artisans creates a token artifact copy of any non-token creature that enters under our opponent's control, then exiles any tokens created with it previously. This can trigger Synthesizer as well if the creature in question has a mana value of 3 or greater, and can give us access to some strong abilities from our opponent's boards. All of these cards end up massively overperforming in tandem with Calgar if left on board too long, and otherwise accelerate our game plan with sacrifice fodder, triggers, and ramp. The deck of course runs a great deal of removal and counter magic to control the board and protect my win conditions, as well as loss prevention effects like Angel's Grace, the Golden Throne, and Teferi's Protection, in the very, very likely case that the pod gets absolutely sick of my shenanigans and tries to oust me from the table. The full deck list will be in the description of this video if you'd like to spend 5 to 10 minutes of your day groaning and cussing me out. So, why am I like this? Well, this type of strategy is definitely not for every playgroup, and I don't try to force it or spring it on unsuspecting tables. The deck clearly sits at a higher power level, and I do my absolute best to be totally clear about how it plays and what to expect in pre-game conversations. A pleasant surprise for me has been just how many tables have been amenable to giving it a go, and I think this is due to how underrepresented the archetype is in the format. with many players saying they've never actually played against Stax. That lack of representation is understandable, given the goal of Commander is to be fun and casual. And Stax is definitely not every player's definition of fun. Where its, albeit twisted, brand of fun is drawn from, for both me as the pilot and other players at the table, is the unique puzzle it creates as more pieces and restrictions hit the table. Being able to see the cogs turn as a pod tries to figure out how to play through a Winter Orb or Jin Gataxia's Progress Tyrant is great, and I'm more than happy to see everyone band together to try and take me out. It's also hugely entertaining to see yourself become essential to someone else's game plan through pieces controlling the table. As was the case in a game at Command Fest with Adam of the Magic Castles podcast. With both Gearheads and an Ohad Tack on the table, he was creating an ungodly amount of rhinos each turn and was a clear threat. I tutored for Winter Orb, the only piece I could see slowing him down at that point, and it definitely did. While initially he wanted to, understandably, murder me with rhinos, he realized that that would just lead to Tom, aka Overfiend, taking him out. I ended up winning that game after Adam took out the rest of the pod, and I cast Beseech the Mirror to find a Silent Arbiter, and wore him down over 3 turns with an Emrakul's Messenger that he just couldn't block. While it's not an archetype that people are going to want to play against every time they shuffle up, it's an interesting challenge that can spice up a pod, forcing everyone to reconsider their deck strategies, correctly utilize their interaction and threat assessment, and adapt or die. It's also worth bearing in mind that you don't have to go whole hog into Stax and make it your deck's entire identity. A few well-deployed Stax pieces can act as incredibly strong support for a different overarching strategy, whatever that may be. But also don't be surprised when you get hated out of the game for dropping a Draneth Magistrate. I think there's a lot of potential benefit to bringing Stax pieces into wider play at the casual level, as they create situations where playing solitaire-style Commander just isn't an option, and players have to consider others' board states in their game plans if they wish to succeed. I'm doing my part. Will you? Thanks as always for watching this video, and I'd also like to thank Kristen Gregory for taking the time to give the script a look over and helping me get my definitions straight when it came to Stax pieces. Her socials are linked below, and you should definitely give her a follow if you're not doing so already. And if you give me a +1/+1 and like and subscribe, I'll deal that much damage to target opponent, creature an opponent controls, or a planeswalker an opponent controls. See you next time.